Welcome, everyone. This is the 2011-2012 Doomhammer season review. Normally, I do weekly videos with highlights. I do have the game clips for each of the weeks, and I might work on those. However, I just wanted to get some content out because I know I've been out for a while. But what we have here is the Baltimore Ravens being the number one team in the AFC, with the Chargers, Patriots, Colts, Jets, Steelers, and Dolphins all in the AFC playoff picture. And then we have the 49ers, Falcons, Commanders, Packers, Cardinals, Giants, and Saints coming up with the NFC. Now, if we go to the rankings here, you'll see that the 49ers and the Ravens are at the top of the league. 49ers still running with Drew Brees. They are a definite team to beat here in the NFC. And then the Ravens started out with Josh Johnson in week 1, but he got injured on the very first play he threw the ball. Since then, it's been Colin Kaepernick all the way through. So the Ravens also have an MVP candidate in Ray Rice, who is one of the top rushers in the league. But as we look at the offensive power rankings, we see the Miami Dolphins, led by quarterback Cam Newton, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders, New York Jets, and then the Cleveland Browns, who are 9-8, just the 8th seed, just missing the playoffs. You see the defensive power rankings with the Jacksonville Jaguars shockingly being number 1, despite having a very mediocre 7-10 season. We see the Atlanta Falcons second. They were one of the top teams in the NFC. They are the 2nd seed heading into the playoffs. The Colts, without Peyton Manning, were 12th in offense, but were 3rd in defense. And then the Titans and the Browns. If you go to some of the weaker teams in the league, we see the shocker was the Minnesota Vikings. This is likely Brett Favre's last season. He played one more year in my franchise than he did in real life, but they were just abysmal the entire year, despite the fact that Brett Favre did lead the league in passing yards. The Rams, the Bengals, the Lions, the Texans, all in the bottom tier teams here. The Rams with the worst record in the league and who will have the number 1 overall pick. That will likely be Andrew Luck. Then we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, being the worst offense in the league with Blaine Gabbert and an injured Darren McFadden. The Texans, Jaguars, Lions, Bengals. Even the surprising one there was the Steelers, because you see they made the playoffs, but they were just an awful offense and they're only 23rd ranked defense. Raiders being the worst defense makes a lot of sense. Eagles, Jets, Seahawks, Bengals, all fitting in the worst defenses. And that makes sense. Like the Eagles missed the playoffs this year, where they had the 2nd best offense, but they had the 2nd worst defense. And so you can't win games when you are that pathetic on defense. So let's go ahead and we'll just break down each team real quick. I mean, we won't go into too much depth in this video, but just enough to catch up. So the Buffalo Bills were 7-10. They were the last in their division. As you can see, the other 3 teams made the playoffs. So Patriots, Jets, and Dolphins leading the way. Christian Ponder in his rookie season was 2,900 yards, 220 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. We see D'Angelo Williams just breaking out with 1,400 yards and 18 rushing TDs, which is huge. Christian Ponder, the 2nd leading rusher. I was trying to get Deji or Karim a little bit more touches there, but only ended up with 19 attempts. As you can see, Jacoby Jones leads the way again with Mike Williams, Scheffler, and really, I mean, they've got a lot to build on. However, Mike Munchak is going to be getting the axe and is not going to be continuing as the head coach with the Buffalo Bills. You can see some top players there: Hainsworth, Evans, Jones, Williams. As we move to the Miami Dolphins, led by Cam Newton, a Rookie of the Year candidate. However, he's going to be behind another rookie QB that's very like him. That had a surprising year, but you can see Newton having 15 more touchdowns than interceptions, 3,600 yards. You got McAllister, who was traded to the Dolphins from the Broncos, as the Broncos had a terrible year. So it's Steven Jackson and McAllister leading the way here. The difference is that I really need to get a young running back on this team. Yes, I've got Joe McKnight, but they need some more help. We can see the 2 Ohio State wide receivers, Hartline and Jenkins, lead the way. Jordy Nelson right behind them. Justin Keller, the tight end that he spent the first-round pick for, coming in 4th in receiving yards. This is a team that was number 1 in the offensive power rankings, and defense was 24th. So a very consistent attack, because they're only, look, again, 6th and 6th. They were 2nd in points. So they were a high-scoring, powerful team. Herm Edwards is not their coach. It is actually John Harbaugh. No, Jim Harbaugh. Sorry, got the wrong Harbaugh. So Jim Harbaugh goes to Miami and essentially turns them around to becoming a playoff team. You can see they do have some talent on the O-line. Trent Williams does start. He just doesn't start as left tackle. I think he's let's see, his depth chart, he should be right. He's right guard. So basically whenever not Trent Williams. Where is he? Oh, Chris Samuels. When Chris Samuels retires, they have their Trent Williams backup ready to move right into left tackle, but he's still getting attention, I think because he's injured, because Chris Samuels is out, Williams is filling it. Patriots, they are the 3rd seed in the league, top of the AFC East. Brady just 14 yards shy of 4,000 yards, 32 to 14 interceptions. Jamal Charles does not have a 1,000-yard season, but he did miss several games. He was injured, so Tony Hunt, rookie Stephen Ridley, took more of the workload. You can see 46 attempts to 34 attempts. This was the year they traded away Randy Moss because he was getting older, and as you can see, I mean, cap space needs to be reworked for every team. I think there's some, when I transferred from Madden 22 to 24, there were some issues, but they got rid of Randy Moss because he just was too expensive, too old. They still have Andre Johnson, Josh Morgan, Leonard Pope, Brandon Tate, Lance Kendricks, the new tight end they just drafted. So they have a lot of options, and I just had to start moving on because they were just loaded with talent. You can see Champ Bailey and Nick Collins really leading the way there in their defensive backfield. So they are a team to beat here in the playoffs. They are the 2-time Super Bowl champions, so we will see if they're able to make it a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Then we have the Jets. We see the 2nd place in the AFC, 5th seed. They are led by Todd Haley as head coach. Alex Smith there with 3,500 yards, a little bit more interceptions than I'd like. He had some injuries during games, so Bomar and Fitzpatrick were able to play. Clinton Portis also injured, so you can see he has 902 yards and 8 TDs. That's not the typical Clinton Portis season, as one of probably the most successful running back in my franchise of all running backs. But Andre Brown got 808 yards and 6 TDs, so he's definitely filled in very well for the New York Jets. We can see Percy Harvin, Weems, Kobe Roby, even Portis, Mercedes Lewis, all leading receivers. If I go to schedule, I believe they started out rough. I believe it was like a loss, a win, a loss. They're 1-2, 2-2, 3-2, 4-2. 4-3, 5-3, 6-3, 7-3. Okay, no, they didn't start out as bad as I thought they did. Maybe I thought they had some struggles early. Well, I guess they had a few losses early, but for the most part, as you can see, they were able to really come through. Couldn't beat the Patriots. That might be a challenge for them in the playoffs. But overall, Jets are also a contender, trying to get past the Patriots for a chance at the Super Bowl. Now, as I mentioned before, the Ravens were the surprise team led by Al Saunders, number 2 in the power rankings. Colin Kaepernick did not have that great of a season, as he has one more interception than touchdown. But we can see that he does lead the way there for the Ravens all the way to I think he was 12-3 because Josh Johnson won the first game, even though he only threw one pass, and he won the Week 18 game, so he has 2 wins in this season for Josh Johnson. Kafka got some playing time on Week 18 when Johnson got hurt. Ray Rice was one of the leading rushers in the league. 24 rushing touchdowns is insane. Parker Jennings didn't really have much as a backup support running back. No real leading receiver there. I mean, Dwayne Bowe's big target, 9 TDs, more of that red zone target. Demaryius Thomas, wasn't able to utilize him as much, or Chambers. As you can see, a lot of the talent here was on the 3rd-ranked rushing attack, which was Ray Rice, and then 26th in pass yards. So Kaepernick just had to kind of steady the ship a little bit, and he did. Then you had the Cincinnati Bengals, who had Tavares Jackson. Tavares Jackson got hurt. Skelton came in for 3 games, lost all 3. Jackson 4-10, not looking good. The running game was stagnant. You see 730 with Marino. Lendell White came in for a few games as a starter. Montario Hardesty, the rookie last year, not having much of a sophomore season. Bolden does get 1,100 yards. Matt Spaeth filling in for the retired Anthony or Tony Gonzalez. Dante Stallworth, Ben. Although these, like Bolden, Stallworth, they're bigger names, their overalls are pretty crap. I mean, they're not, I mean, it's 76. I don't know why it's, I think in Madden it's actually lower than that. But they're not, it's not the best receiving core for the Bengals. And so there's a lot of repairing that has to be done. The biggest success was they won the last game of the season to defeat the Cleveland Browns, who, if the Cleveland Browns won that game, would have made the playoffs. Now, the cost of that game is that the Bengals went from the worst team in the league, which would have given them basically Andrew Luck, to being the third worst team in the league. So they are likely missing out on both RG3 and Andrew Luck. That doesn't mean they can't draft Tannehill, Whedon, or Wilson, or somebody else. But they, in beating the Browns and stopping their playoff berth, they gave up Andrew Luck. Cleveland Browns, you see, with Terrell Pryor Sr. I drafted him third round, kind of ignored the scandal that made him into the supplemental draft. We can see there 3,100 yards, but the biggest stat there is over 1,000 rushing yards with 14 rushing TDs. I believe he is likely to be the rookie of the year, even over Cam Newton, who made the playoffs. Steve Slayton, the lead running back with George Bell. We see 280 with Peyton Hillis. They were the first number one rushing team in the league, according to these stats right here. We see Anthony Gonzalez having a great year. Robisky, another Ohio State player. Dominic Hickson from Akron University. Ben Watson, Billy Bajima. All these different stats there. I mean, Ohio State is throughout this entire team because of Jim Tressel. The Browns almost made the playoffs. I kind of see this as the Cleveland Browns 07 to 08 year when they went 10-6 and missed the playoffs just by a half a game, by a tie break. That's what's happening with this Browns here. They were the 8th seed, just barely into the playoffs, but unfortunately, Pittsburgh and Miami got the tie break. Steelers, again, the ones who did get the tie break under Lovie Smith. Big Ben had 3,300 yards. MJD had 1,300, and that's it. That's their team. They didn't have many rushers. They weren't the best. Again, 30th in the league in rush yards because there was no real help or support. We can see Emmanuel Sanders getting the lead with the passing yards with Henderson, Walker, Kelly. The team was just kind of boring to play with. They weren't as typical as the normal Steelers we know of. Even though their defense is 23rd, they do have like the likes of Dante Whitner, Doomerville, some other prominent defensive players too. Let's see. So Dan Williams, Tom Bahali, they did draft J.J. Watt. Still have Joey Porter, Aqib Talib, Deshaun Goldson, Brandon Spikes. I think he was Brandon Spikes a rookie this year, or was he? Maybe it was 2008. When was this? Okay, he's a sophomore. He's his second year. But yeah, so Pittsburgh makes the playoffs, and they could be a very tough team. They are facing the Patriots in round 1, so we'll see how that goes. Then we have the Houston Texans. They were one of the worst teams in the league. It's not Gary Kubiak. It was Doug Marrone, I believe, is the... No, Jeff Fisher. Jeff Fisher is the one that's with the Houston Texans. He has Jake Locker as his quarterback, and as you can see, that's about how a Jake Locker season would go. He did have more touchdowns than interceptions, but still turnover machine. We see 6 fumbles there with the rushing yards. CJ Spiller, 1,200 yards, even with injury. Cedric Benson coming in 393. Wide receivers, which is where they are weak. They tried having Reggie Williams from the 49ers come in, but he didn't do much. Mario Manningham, Louis Murphy, Finley, just a weak overall team. As you can see, their top players are defense. And that's why they're the 4th in pass. They have Mike Doss. They have Terrell Suggs, Josh Wilson, D'Amico Ryans. We need some work on the offense. But, I mean, they're going to probably ride out Jake Locker as long as they can. But, yeah, that's pretty much it for Houston. They've got a lot of work to be done. The Indianapolis Colts were without Peyton Manning because, of course, he had the neck injury. He will be leaving the team at the end of the year because they went 12-5 without him. Brady Quinn went 23-19, TD to interceptions, almost 3,000 yards. Chris Johnson, the superstar, with 1,763 yards rushing. Leon Washington carried some of the workload as a backup running back, but still not as powerful as Johnson. The man's crazy. We see old man Reggie Wayne with Jeremy Shockey, Victor Cruz, the PK Sam, one of my Mr. Irrelevant, who has been existing in this league since 2004 draft. Yeah, you never heard of him, have you? Well, you do now. The guy, I think, played one season in real life, and in my franchise, he's been kind of the late round shocker, like a Danny Amendola, Kevin Hogan, someone you don't expect that comes out of nowhere and isn't like a superstar, but is a reliable role player. So the Colts, we're going to have to see how their quarterback situation is moving forward. They'll likely stick with Quinn as their main starter, but they may draft, they may sign somebody. They do have Tyrod Taylor, played a little bit, 87 yards and a TD, but nothing really remarkable there. Now the Jacksonville Jaguars, also on the lower side, Wade Phillips is getting fired. Because, this was the year that they should have made a good run for the playoffs with Peyton Manning's injury, but the Colts still schooled everybody in the division. Carr with a terrible TD to interception ratio. There wasn't really anybody to replace him with because Brian Brom or I think it was Zach Wilson? Robinson? No, okay. I don't know where he is. Let's see. Zach Robinson, yeah. Nobody there is going to really replace David Carr, especially because he was a Super Bowl champion. But we do have DeMarco Murray with an impressive 907 yards, 7 TDs, rookie year. Marion Barber, kind of a dual back. We look at 631 yards there. Harry Douglas, Hakeem Nicks, Limas Swede leading the way there for the passing game. But with them, we can see the defense is why they're so good. You got Patrick Willis, Dante Robinson, John Henderson. A really studded defense. If I go to the depth chart here, you'll see that they've been really... Darryl Smith, Patrick Robinson, they got some holes there. They got some gaps. We can see Chris Long, as another top pick. So they got a lot of options there on defense, but offense, they got some work to do. They're probably going to need to find a quarterback that can take them farther than David Carr. David Carr getting older. A whole 32 years old. Not terribly old, but getting to the point where he's starting to become more irrelevant. Then we have the Tennessee Titans. This is a season that was horrible starting out, but it was about 7 of the last 8 games they won. So they really bounced back majorly. They were on track for Andrew Luck or RG3, but after they got rid of Kevin O'Connell after like a 1-6 start, Josh Freeman came in and really turned the team around, actually saving Pep Hamilton. Pep Hamilton is the coach I was going to fire, but after this season and that end of the season, he is going to stay, largely due to Josh Freeman's powerhouse ending. We see Jonathan Stewart with 1,100 yards, 9 TDs, and then Greg Jennings with over 1,100 yards, Matthew Slater, and Pierre Garçon. They did give up Anquan Bolden to the Bengals last year, but they have still a very strong receiving core, even with Jermaine Gresham at tight end. Denver, another abysmal year for Sam Bradford, 6-11. I guess maybe somewhat better. Maybe there's been some growth, but for the most part, Bradford does not appear to be the future. Right now, Tim Tebow looks like the better 2010 draft prospect, and even Colt McCoy in his small appearances with the Washington Commanders looked better and did better. Could find ways to win games. Ahmad Bradshaw, the backup for, I believe it was the Patriots in my franchise, leads the way for the Denver Broncos as the lead back. We see Brian Leonard at 162, Chris Perry, and then Wes Welker, shy of 1,000-yard season. AJ Green, the rookie, had 12 touchdowns, 834 yards. Just needed a real quarterback to get on the ball, and that's not what Sam Bradford has been. Bradford's moving toward that bust category. And let's see, anything else relevant about them? Not really, but when your fullback is your third best player, that's not a good sign for your team. Now the Chiefs have Dick LeBeau, and again, they made the playoffs 2 years in a row last year. But in the end, it got to the point where Dick LeBeau has been on this team since 2003. After he was fired from the Bengals, he went to the Chiefs. Had some good seasons, had some bad seasons, but they have decided to fire Dick LeBeau. Eli Manning is still performing well, but he is getting older too. I think, let's see, how old is he? He's 30 years old. Still probably the main guy for their team. Even Marshawn Lynch, 1,600 yards rushing, 19 TDs. We see that they'll start transitioning from Dallas Clark, who led the way this year, to Kyle Rudolph at some point. Rudolph not getting that many touches or attempts as Clark, but still Roddy White, Jericho Cotchery, Marquise Colston, Austin Collie, all part of this Kansas City Chiefs team that can be either really good or meh, depending on the situation. They do have a solid defensive duo there with Tim Jennings and Jonathan Joseph. Just really solid DBs. Tyvon Branch, even Roy Williams. They got to maybe work on their pass rush. Pecco, Tyson Jackson, linebacking core a little bit weaker, but it's their DBs that really carry them, especially because of these two top-notch backs. Now, the Oakland Raiders, they had some moments where they were vying for the playoffs, but sort of fell off the end near the end of the season. You see the loss. So that those last 3 games losing was not good for them. Losing 4 of the last 5, 5 of the last 6. So they had some more growing to do. First year under Hugh Jackson, not Bobby Petrino. Matt Ryan almost with 4,000 yards, but really high TDs with 38. We see Sean Green, not much help from Travis Henry or Vereen, but Sean Green really a solid contributor for this Oakland Raiders team. Julio Jones, and yes, I did partly draft him because of Matt Ryan. It was a good fit. And then James Hardy, who has been Matt Ryan's main target, really was a good duo. Because if all of a sudden Julio Jones would be covered or double teamed, Hardy could then take the workload there. Vernon Davis, the veteran Chad Ochocinco, they had a lot of pieces. They just couldn't find a way to win. They are in a tougher division. I mean, there's some good teams. There were Chiefs and Chargers. But overall, this team still has a lot of work still to be done. But we're 4th in passing, which was impressive this season. We see the San Diego Chargers. Aaron Rodgers leading the way there to the 2nd seed in the AFC. Larry Johnson injured most of the year, but still put up 940 yards. Chris Wells, or Beanie Wells, you see 755, 7 TDs. There's 2 receivers there in the 900s, Holmes and Lee Evans. We see Devin Hester, the speedster, who did have several kick return touchdowns. If we go to special teams, he had 1 punt return and 4 kick return. So he was a tough force to be reckoned with. Let's see, what else do I want to point out about this team? You can see very offensive heavy, quarterback, tight end, Santonio Holmes. Some of their best players. And they still rank very well in the power rankings. They want to get past the first round. They want to get to the Super Bowl. And we'll see if they're able to make it happen this year. As for the NFC, the Cowboys were also a team that was abysmal very early. I thought they could have been in the Andrew Luck sweepstakes. But it started off with Romo. I think he went like 1-3 early. Let's see. No, 0-3. 0-4, yeah. See, they were 0-5. Here's 0-3. Then we put Webb in. Webb started to win a few games. The mobility was helpful. But then Webb got injured for the rest of the year, so Tony Romo had to go back in. So you can see they're both very similar, except for Romo was more efficient later in the season, getting the 17 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. I tried to really work through Adrian Peterson the entire season. And it's not John Harbaugh as the head coach. It is, in fact, Mike Shanahan. So that just needs an update. I haven't done that in Madden yet. But and they had some injuries like Jason Witten, McCluster. You can see Webb is out there with the injury. But we look at like Joseph Adai, McCluster not contributing too much on the running game. Robinson, I think it's Aldrick Robinson, the lead receiver. Really, they need to find themselves a real wide receiver because they're just garbage. Greg Little was the receiver drafted trying to be that spot, but that's what happens when you draft players in Madden when you know who they really are. They didn't know Greg Little was going to suck. But Aldrick Robinson was the main receiver. Perhaps the Cowboys are able to pull in a receiver in this draft. They also will want a quarterback. We don't know. Will they go for Brandon Whedon and bring the local guy to the area? As for the New York Giants under Jim Caldwell, we see Carson Palmer with 40 touchdowns, 5th passing offense, 3,700 yards, made the playoffs. We see Ryan Matthews with 1,100 yards. I think it's Tawan Jones, 307 as the backup running back. Mark Clayton there doing his thing with 1,100 yards. Devin Aromashodu came over from the Indianapolis Colts, had 15 touchdowns. He was a touchdown machine. Jerome Simpson, who normally leads the way for the Giants, only coming in 3rd here. We got Jimmy Graham. And then really the big surprise was the Commanders, which I'll get in a moment. They were the ones that really took the division by storm. Michael Vick just took charge of the division even when he got injured. Colt McCoy was still able to get them in a respectable 3rd seed. The Giants had to fight their way through the Eagles. And then the Cowboys, I mean, I keep thinking the Cowboys are garbage, but they do come from a very tough division. And so this is a tough division moving forward. They have a lot of the pieces in place. You got Carson Palmer, who is 31, getting older, but he came over from the Bengals in a trade, and I think Palmer has a good landing spot, comfortable spot here with the Giants. Now, the Eagles were a disappointing season because they were trying to get into the playoffs. We see McNabb, who is right now the leading candidate for MVP, which surprised me. I mean, maybe it was a combination of the almost 4,000 yards, 39 TDs, and then the rushing yards, but I don't get why he's top factor there. But we see this Eagles team where a lot of pieces: Ted Ginn, Deshaun Jackson, Heath Miller, Frank Gore at running back, who had a fantastic year with 1,300 yards. This is a team that has so much talent, but I'm worried about them falling apart now. Because I don't know if I re-signed one of these people. I forget if it was Deshaun Jackson or... Yeah, Deshaun Jackson got the big contract, getting almost $20 million a year because he's the younger guy. But Ted Ginn also is needing a contract, and I don't know if they'll have the money to sign him. Maybe I can franchise tag him and work within the negatives. But they're not doing well financially because they have so much talent. And they were trying to win a Super Bowl, but they weren't able to pull it off, and their window might be closing. We see the Commanders with Michael Vick and Colt McCoy all doing their thing. Michael Vick more so with the rushing, only 533 yards. But how I've interpreted it as ever since Marty Morningway came in as head coach, which is last year, Michael Vick's play style has changed. I started doing more passing with him rather than always running. And because of that, look how efficient he was. 23 TDs to 5 interceptions. Even Colt McCoy, 11 TDs, 4 interceptions. So very efficient. Mike Goodson getting 218 attempts. Major workload there. Chris Ivory, more of the goal line, heavy running back, getting 5 TDs. They were the second rush team. And whereas the Browns were the number 1 rush team because of 1,000-yard rushing by Pryor and a lot of running from their backs, it wasn't because of Michael Vick that they're second. I mean, maybe it is that he's second, but it's not that Vick was the 1,500 rusher. It was Goodson. They do have Vincent Jackson, Teo Johnson, Darius Haywood-Bay, Bennett. So a decent young receiving core there. I mean, I don't know how old Jackson is. Jackson might be a little older now. 28? Yep, 28. We got Earl Bennett, Darius Haywood-Bay. And Haywood-Bay's acceleration, it's his speed. That's a benefit. Now, as we go on to the Detroit Lions, they've had Chris Palmer for many years. And he has had some playoff runs, some success. But now it got to the point where they were 7-win team last year or something like that. But now 4-13. They're in that, I don't know if they're not the second seed, but they might be the 4th draft pick. And so Croyle having a rough year. Mike Teal played the last game, but, he's not going to be anything worthwhile. They're not building around Teal. Reggie Bush, Danny Woodhead, Croyle as the leading rushers. Bush still a talented running back. Their top best player, even with Lawrence Taylor or Timmons. We see Todd Heap leading the way with receiving. Avery, Hill, Armonte Edwards. Try to get Reggie Bush more involved as a pass catcher. But Lions, just terrible, just awful. It was a tough year. They would have been in the Andrew Luck RG3 sweepstakes. They might be able to trade in. I don't know yet. But For right now, they are likely going to be needing a quarterback because Croyle is overall bad and he didn't play very well this season. So a 68 overall, if you're a 68 overall and you're winning, I'll keep you around, but he wasn't winning this year. Green Bay finally gets it together, a 10-7 season and winning the division. Tomlin's first year with Stafford, they went 9-8. Then they were 3-14 last year, which is how they got Von Miller. And Von Miller has been a beast. I believe he led or almost led the league in sacks. But Stafford there with 3,800 yards, 35 TDs to 18 interceptions. LeSean McCoy with 1,100 yards. Cadillac Williams went in when there was an injury. And then you can see 9 touchdowns. Now, that is Antonio Brown with 890 yards, 12 touchdowns. Randall Cobb, Jordan Cameron, Julian Edelman, a pretty solid core. I was very disappointed with the Packers before because they had all these pieces and couldn't get it together. But now they were able to get together, getting the division win. You can see cornerback Nnamdi Asomugha, Von Miller, some of the core defensive players for them. We'll see how they do in their first playoff series in quite a while. I don't know if it's been since Brett Favre, but I think it's been since Brett Favre because I don't think Jay Cutler got them to the playoffs. Now for the big disappointing team was the Vikings. This was a bonus year for Brett Favre. One more year. And this time it got Norv Turner fired because this is the one where they went to the Super Bowl about 2 years ago. And they now are picking 32nd in power rankings. So Favre did lead the league in yards, but you can see he had 26 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. He is only like a 71 overall. He wasn't that special, or 75. I don't know why it's 75, but maybe it's 71 in Madden because his morale is probably trash. But Ryan Mallett is supposed to be the rookie or the quarterback of the future. We'll see if the new coach decides to keep Mallett or go and try to get RG3 or swap with the Rams and try to get Andrew Luck on the Vikings, or if they sign like Peyton Manning to fill that void. Kevin Smith, 944 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's been a decent running back, but he's not someone that I kind of really want to keep. Alex Green, not much of a support back. We see Doug Baldwin, Mike Wallace, and Gronkowski. And Gronkowski should have had a much bigger year here. But instead, he ended up just having the 725 yards. And he did drop a lot of passes. I was disappointed with maybe how he was rated or his stats because he didn't play the way he was supposed to, in my opinion, as an X-Factor tight end. But they are picking at the bottom of the league. Then we have the Atlanta Falcons. We see at 11-6, the second seed. They are led here by Jason Campbell. Campbell doing his thing with 3,300 yards, 22 touchdowns, decent runner. I don't think Campbell is that good, honestly, but he's winning games. And Brad Childress, not that great of a coach, but winning games. Larry Fitzgerald did get injured, which is not great heading into the playoffs. Matt Forte, 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. We see Fitzgerald almost getting to 1,000, but that's largely due to a lot of injuries during the year. Julian Thomas, I think it's Darius Butler. Meacham, Dion Butler, Robert Meacham, Muhammad Massaquoi as the receivers. So we'll see how their season goes. I mean, they've made the playoffs before. They were the number one defense. So who was it that superseded them? Jacksonville. Jacksonville took number 1. They were number 2. And if you want to see why they're number 2, they are stacked on defense. Very like Antonio Cromartie, Leotis McKelvin, Clay Matthews, Darrell Washington. I guess maybe not as stacked as I thought they were, but they do perform incredibly well, which is largely due to their success this season being the number 2 defense and having the 9th offense. When you have both of those, that's really helpful in going the distance. And maybe they can pull off a playoff victory or 2 and maybe make the Super Bowl. Now, the Panthers had a disappointing year. Again, they are normally the one with the best defense every year, and I'll show you because they are very loaded. They had Campman and Ayers and Dunlap, right? Julius Peppers. They had Chris Jenkins, Pat Sims, DeMarcus Ware, Dan Morgan, David Harris, Devin McCourty, Sam Shields, Chris Harris, Alfonso Smith, Munnerlyn, Daniel Manning, Michael Huff. Top-notch defense all the way through and through. But this year they didn't come out and perform well. Booker did well on the ground with 1,400 yards, with Ben Tate with 389, both 9 TDs. Flacco under 3,000 yards, but 50-50 with TDs and interceptions, which isn't great. LaVale Hawkins, Steve Smith are some of the challenges we've got. So we look at the roster here. Steve Smith's an 80 overall, but he is also 32. So we need to start. And Torrey Smith didn't have much of a breakout year. As you can see, Torrey Smith, 133 yards, 6 catches. Not great. Other receivers kept getting more touches. So we need to find a way to maybe better get Flacco and Torrey Smith, who were real-life partners. Well, you know what I mean, partners, as in wide receiver, QB partners, that with the Baltimore Ravens, trying to make that chemistry happen here in Carolina. Maybe in the second year, Smith can get that opportunity. Torrey Smith, that is. So the Saints, they came out of nowhere. I was expecting Josh McDaniels to be on the chopping block, and sure enough, they came through with a lot of late. Look at that, 4 straight wins to end the season. That really got them into playoff position. You're losing 0-14 to Atlanta. But Tim Tebow, 3,100 yards, close to a 50-50 ratio there. Still ran for 318. Brandon Marshall, a great target. Kenny Britt, Antonio Bryant, Greg Olsen. Even the goofy tight ends here, like Anobin, it was pretty reliable. Saints, for the most part, we see Whitworth, a solid line. They got some defensive studs there with Linval Joseph, Patrick Peterson, who was a great pick for them. They get to the 7th seed, and we'll see how they handle the playoffs. I think the first game they play is against their rival, the Falcons. So that's going to be exciting. Now, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the NFC champions last year. I think they were the 7th seed, making it to the Super Bowl. I've had a lot of 7th seeds make it. I don't know how. They just tend to do it. They do have a solid defense as well. I think it's an NFC South thing to have a lot of good defensive players. You can see you got Atkins, who isn't developing as well as he should, but Geno Atkins there. We see Darrelle Revis, really the star of this defense, taking charge. They're a decent defense, but they're not as good as the other teams in that division. The real challenge was Blaine Gabbert not being good. Everybody knows that. Matt Schaub came in for a few games because there was an injury to Gabbert, and it didn't do much for them. I mean, I could have considered firing Ron Rivera, but after making the Super Bowl last year, and they were still a respectable season, I decided to let it go. Darren McFadden, though, what a star. He's there with 1,780, 9 touchdowns. So we can see even Javid Best not getting as much attention, but I was trying to feed him the ball a little bit. As for receiving, they didn't have as much because they didn't have a good quarterback. So Macklin, Clayton, Daniels, all like about 500 receiving yards. Then we have the Cardinals, who made the playoffs. And this was after Rivers started the season. And then it switched to Dalton, and Dalton just turned this team around. Whatever it is, Phillip Rivers, I don't play well with him, or he's just not, his ratings don't work for me for whatever reason. But Dalton did. 27-11. You see, good ratio touchdown interception, but they were just losing out of the gate, and I wanted to make a change. We see lost to the Commanders. They beat the Giants. I mean, they had a couple wins there, but then it needed to go. I think maybe he got injured too. Whatever it was, Dalton ended up being the guy that I went, you know what? Let's go with the rookie after a few starts. Henne has been just garbage. He will never have the career he did in real life. Donald Brown with 846. Darren Sproles, 426. I'm trying to use Sproles more often. Parmesan is over there with a shy of 100. He was more of the goal line back when it came down to how to position your running backs. But a big factor was Calvin Johnson Jr. Now, he's out and he was missing the first few weeks of the playoffs, which is not good for the Cardinals heading to the postseason. But, excuse me. You got Eric Johnson, but really Troy Williamson, Brad Smith, the former quarterback, and even Santana Moss, who didn't get much in the season, will pick up more because of the injury to Calvin Johnson Jr. I see Stevie Johnson maybe also trying to get some more more play time because of that Calvin Johnson Jr. injury. But really, all I had to do was lob the ball up to Calvin Johnson Jr. and it could be a touchdown, which is why I just needed a decent quarterback in Arizona. And for some reason, Phillip Rivers just was not a decent quarterback. He might find himself as a backup somewhere. Maybe he could be a backup to Brady Quinn in Indianapolis. But we'll have to find out where Rivers goes because it's Andy Dalton town here in Arizona. Seattle, another team that could use a new quarterback. They've been sticking with Derek Anderson, who decent overall and decent track record as a quarterback, making a Super Bowl, 79 overall, strong arm guy. Definitely a better career in mind than in real life. Vince Young having a little bit of playing time, but not really quality playing time, 1 to 4. Mendenhall, Duckett, that's 700-ish rushing yards each. Anderson getting about 130. We see tight end Brandon Pettigrew with 830 leading the way receiving. Amendola, Braylon Edwards, LaFell, and again, Edwards and Anderson had a lot of chemistry with the Browns in real life. So I was fortunate to put those two together. But Greg Schiano is going to get the boot. He's getting fired after this season. They do have a lot of talent. You can see Troy Polamalu, Mario Williams, Cortland Finnegan. They have these talented players on defense, and they just don't come through. Polamalu, man, he's getting old. I don't know how old he is now. He's 30 now. Always been with the Seahawks, and they've always been kind of a disappointment. So we'll see if they're able to get it together moving forward. But I'm looking at possibly this could be a season where they could draft like a Russell Wilson, fits perfectly, because like a Derek Anderson or a Vince Young, they're suitable starters, but they're not good starters. So you draft someone later, but we'll see how the draft turns out. I'm not even there yet. 49ers, best team in the league, or I mean between them and the Ravens. Breeze, 3,400 yards. You can see the 35-12 touchdown interception ratio. Arian Foster and Deion Lewis doing fairly well. We see Randy Moss, and after being traded to the 49ers from the Patriots, killing it, slaying it. One of probably their big reasons for success. Then you have James Jones coming over from Green Bay, being a contributor. Des Bryant in a down year, but that's largely because Randy Moss got most of the big plays, big attention, but still 11 TDs for Bryant. So you see Bryant and Moss being the top receivers there, with James Jones being kind of the slot man. Well, I guess Moss was the slot, but James Jones getting time when we had 3 or 4 wideouts. Brent Selleck not doing as much this year, but still a solid contributor. You see they are third in takeaways on defense, 14th defense, 7th on offense. They do have, if you want to see their defense here, from Haloti Ngata, LaRon Landry, and this is the guy, love this man, Ashton Yabouti. Ashton Yabouti is somebody who I never expected to do well, but he had good games, got the superstar, and just has progressed so well. And I love when random players all of a sudden become superstars, and that's what Yabouti did. And it's fun to say Yabouti. Then we have the Rams, the worst team in the league. Yes, Greg Williams is fired. Jay Cutler not having, didn't do well, touchdown to interception ratio. I don't know if he'll stay. He'll probably be out when I bring in Andrew Luck. I can't imagine the Rams going anywhere else. In real life, the Rams had Bradford and stuck with them when they had the 2nd overall pick, but they need a new QB. We see Willis McGahee with 1,400 yards, 14 TDs. I try to get Gerhardt some more action there, but he just 20 attempts, I guess, wasn't enough to really increase this. But Roy Williams, Crabtree, Old Man Torrey Holt, all trying to be a part of this Rams team that I thought was going to perform much better than they did. But no surprise, they're the worst team in the league. We can see on their defense, I remember that was abysmal before. They've started to rebuild a little bit. At Robert Quinn, trying to be a pass rusher for them. Robert Thomas, Lofton, Phillips, Terrell Thomas. But again, Jarius Byrd. So they have some pieces on what was a very terrible defense, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Excuse me. So here are some of the league leaders. As you can see, Favre, despite a bad season, leading the way with yards. Palmer led the way with touchdowns, and then Brett Favre leading the league with interceptions with Big Ben. Rushing, we've got with yards there. We've got McFadden, Johnson, Rice, Lynch, and Goodson. With touchdowns, Rice and Johnson just destroying the league probably setting records. I don't know. Probably, maybe I have to look at season records and see how many people have in my franchise have destroyed them. Receiving, it was Randy Moss and Calvin Johnson Jr., and if he was not injured, he probably would have passed Randy Moss. Julio Jones in his rookie year, Ted Ginn, the shocking Anthony Gonzalez being the main target there for Terrell Pryor, all with leading receiving. TDs there, Devin Aromashodu, shockingly had 15 TDs, leading the league. And then Calvin Johnson, Deshaun Jackson. So like Jackson was more of the touchdown machine, whereas Ginn was more of the yards for Philadelphia. Tackles, if you care, we see Troy Polamalu, Doss, Mays, CeCe Brown, Arno. Sack leaders was Mathis Kiwanuka, Von Miller right behind him with 11. Andre Carter's old man still kicking it. 2 of the Jaguars, which is probably helping them with their number 1 defensive rating. Interceptions, we see Michael Huff with 9. Big ties there with 7 all the way through with these DBs. Kicking, let's see, the one who kicked the most. Who made the most? I can't even sort. We see attempted was Brown and Prater. And then hitting 18. Returns, we had several kick return touchdowns this year. So Devin Hester had a punt return touchdown. Kenny Moore, touchdown. 2 touchdowns for Josh Barrett. Javaris Williams. Even Steven Ridley got in the game of punt return touchdowns. DJ Ware had a punt return touchdown. Brandon Gibson, touchdown. Denarius Moore, touchdown. Kick return, we had Chaz Schillens, the 49er, with 2 touchdowns. Jonathan Zenon with a touchdown. Is that Dexter? No, that's Willie Fontenot. Josh Cribbs had 2 for Cleveland. Yay, go Browns. We had Jalen Parmelli. Santana Moss for the Cardinals. 4 for Devin Hester, the return specialist there. And then Brandon Hughes. Kenny Moore with a Joe McKnight. Marcus McClinton. Quentin Lawrence. Lavernius Coles. Joseph Morgan. Wally Lundy. Manuel Johnson. Cadillac Williams. Javaris Williams again. Johnny Knox. Mike Mickens. Brandon Gibson for Pittsburgh. 2 for Titus Young, and then 3 for Denarius Moore. So I had a lot more kick return, punt returns this season than I've ever had. But very excited to see this playoffs unfold. Let me know who you think is going to win this series and win the Super Bowl. I will be having playoff videos coming up shortly.